All right, good morning. Today we are going to be starting to talk about percents. And percents are parts of numbers. And I bet you can think of something else that might be a part of a number. Fractions and decimals are parts of numbers. So when using the percent bar model that we're going to show you, 100% represents the whole thing. And so for each one, we're going to shade in the percentage given and then give an explanation for what you did. So this first one, and you'll notice on all of these are split up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because we work in base 10. So each one of these is worth 10% because 100 divided by 10 equals 10%. So if I start down here, this is like 0%, and all the way down here is 100%. Well, if I'm going to shade in 100%, that means I'm shading in all of it. So I'm going to go ahead and color that all in. And while I'm coloring and you're coloring, I want you to think about on the next few, I want you to pause this video and I want you to take a look at the next one and think, how much of that would I shade in? Now that you've come back, 50%, I'm like, 50% means, well, if each one of these is 10%, I should do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can also think that 50% means half. And so that means half of our blocks got shaded in to represent our 50%. So once we've noticed that each block is 10%, we can think, 25%. How much of that would I shade? So that's 10%. That one's 20%. Now if I shade another whole block, that wouldn't be 25%. That would be 30% at that point. Well, how do I get to 25? Well, 25 is halfway, so it's going to be half of a block. That next one right below it is 30%, so I'm going to do 1, 2, and I'm going to shade that whole third block in there. So you can see the difference between 25 and 30% is 5%, or half of one of our blocks. Using the idea from 25, how would you shade in 15 and 55? I want you to pause the video right here and I want you to try those. You can color them in lightly if you're nervous, and then start it back up and check it. All right, so hopefully you saw that one block was 10%. Another whole block would be 20, so I can't do that. So half of that block is 5%. So if this is 10%, this half piece that I colored, and then half of 10 is 5, so 5%. And that's where we got our 50%. And I'm using the same idea down here, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50%, and then this number is half of 10%, so 5%. So when we're thinking of numbers and we're finding percents of them, we're going to be visualizing this. On the back of that paper here, one of the things that you have done in the past, and one thing that we just want to catch you back up on, is converting rational numbers. So the definition of a percent, we can think of that definition of percent. It's a ratio that compares a number to 100. So when I am converting a fraction to a percent, I'm going to divide the numerator by the denominator, and my second step is going to be multiply by 100. And when I multiply by 100, that's going to take my decimal point. So say I did 3 divided by 4, and I got 0.75. When I multiply by 100, that's going to take my decimal point and it's going to move it this way, 1, 2 spaces to 75%. So I move that over 2 spaces, and because I'm multiplying by 100, it's 2 spaces to the right. If I needed to divide by 100 at some point, it'd be 2 spaces to the left, just for future reference. So down here, we're going to practice some of these. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a couple, and then I want you to pause, and I want you to try it yourself and check out and see if you got them right. So on this first one, if I do 2 divided by 5, if I have a calculator, I can use that. I could also do long division. I guarantee you that on the air test, you were going to see where it asks you to turn a fraction into a decimal, and you're not going to have a calculator on that part. So it's good to know that my top number goes inside, and my bottom number stays on the outside in case you've forgotten that. I'm going to add some zeros. Now 5 can't go into 2. I can't make a group of 5 if I only have 2. So I put a 0 there. And then I think of this, put my decimal point up, I think of this as 20. Well, how many times can 5 go into 20? It goes in 4 times. I get a remainder of 0. I don't need that one. So this is the decimal 0.4. When I want to write that as a percent, then remember I have to multiply by 100, which means I'm going to take this decimal point and I'm going to move it over 1, 2 spaces. So this is the percent, 40%. Now if it happens to be a calculator problem that you can use a calculator on, I can take and do my 35 divided by 60, and I get 0.58, and that 3 is repeating. So remember that vinculum, that repeating. If I have a whole bunch, I only put the line over the part that is repeating. When I multiply this times 100, it moves my decimal point over, and you'll find that I still have a number after my decimal point this time. So I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep that bar over it as well, to say that this is 58 and 3/10 repeating percent. So it's a little more than 58% in that case. This next problem, this 1 means I have 100%. So I have 100% plus some more. So when I do 4 divided by 5, I get 0.8. But I have this 1 in front of it. So this is the same as 1.8. Whatever the whole number is, I keep it as a whole number, and then just this decimal becomes my, or just this fraction rather, becomes my decimal. When I multiply by 100, I move 2 spaces over, and so that's 180%, which might sound weird, but we're going to talk about markups and markdowns. And so if I'm selling something and I increase the price, I'm going to charge 100% of what it cost me to make it plus more. So that's where we're going to see things like that. 3/8, I'm just going to demonstrate by hand again here on this one. And I can't go into 3, so I go into there. So 3 times 24, I get 6 and 0. I bring down that 0. How many times can 8 go into 6? Well, that's 7 and 56. I get 4, so I bring down another 0. Just so you remember how to do this. And that's 40. And now I have 0.375, which when I multiply by 100 gives me 37.5%. And you'll hear the half percents a lot when we're talking about taxes. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to write the following percentages as fractions in simplest form. What you might remember from last year, hopefully, is that all I do is I take this number, I write it over 100, and then I see if I can reduce it. So yes, I can reduce it. Both of these divide by 5. So I get 9 over 20. That is my simplest form, and so I am done. In other words, I can't reduce it any further. For this next one, I have 13.5%. And so another thing I can use, I can think, well, that is the decimal 0.135. That takes me out not to the hundreds place, but to the thousands place. So I would put this one over 1,000, and then I would reduce, because we don't want a decimal in our fraction. So if I reduce these both, I'm like, I can divide those both by 5. And 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. And 135 divided by 5 is 27. And so right there, I'm going to stop because I cannot reduce. I can't divide 200 by 9 or by 3 or by 27, so I'm just done there. 120%, when I'm going to write that as a fraction simplest form, remember that the 100 is a 1. So this 1 right here becomes 1 whole. I then think about the 20%. So I'm going to think of that as 20 over 100. The only other way I could do this would be 120 over 100. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. I can cross out those zeros, and then I've got 12 over 10, and that's 1 2/10, or 1 1/5. So I just always definitely can think about it that way. I like to think about it this way. I keep that 1 whole, and then I see that I can divide these by 10. I could actually divide these both by 20 if you're savvy, and get 1 over 5. 80%, I'm back to just that 80 over 100, and then I reduce. I can divide these both by 20 as well, and that gives me 4 over 5. Down at the bottom, we're converting these percentages to decimals, and when I go from a percentage to a decimal, instead of multiplying by 100, I'm going to divide by 100. Which means that my 71%, there's a decimal point right here, and I am just moving that back to the left. So when I divide by 100, I move that decimal point 2 places to the left. So that means I would get 0.71 or 0.71. With our next one here, when I divide by 100, and I take that decimal point right here and I move it 2 spots, you'll notice we have a whole, 2 wholes, so 2.13. Our next one right here, that decimal point's here, you'll notice I move it those 2 places when I divide by 100. I have to fill in this place right here with another 0, so 8% looks like 0.8 or 8 cents. So I think of it as cents, so like 71% is 71 cents. Same thing up here. When I'm going from a decimal, I think of 4 dimes or 4/10 as 40%. So 16% looks like 16 cents. So when I divide by 100, I get 0.16 because it moved that decimal point 2 places over that way. This one says write the following decimals as percentages, which means we're going to go back to multiplying by 100, which means my decimal point's coming back that way. So $1.25, if you want to think about it that way, is 125%. This is like 3 cents, which is 3%. 43 cents is 43%. And $4.07 is 407%. On the second page, you're going to actually use these to put them to work.